Hello, I'm Rob. Welcome to the channel, and today we are going to be painting, a little unusually for me, a pristine Harlequin vehicle, a Starweaver, a Void Weaver, whichever is your preferred build option. I'm going to show you guys how to paint one today. We're going to rely quite heavily on the airbrush. But there's also going to be lots of brush techniques as well. If you are somebody who doesn't own an airbrush, I think, and I will go through lots of ways that you can go about doing this, even if you don't own an airbrush as well. So never fear. Although the Harlequin diamonds might be a little bit trickier and might be a little bit more time consuming, but we're going to go through lots of techniques that might be useful if you want to create a really decent tabletop Harlequin force today. I'm going to recommend that we work in sub-assemblies. You'll see why a little bit later. So we've got like the carapace to the actual kind of weaver itself. I'll just call it a weaver for today. And then we've got the guy sitting on the back, the gun, and then we've got the canopy on the clear canopy. So we're going to use matte black and moldy wine first of all. Now I'm going to use this in a ratio of 1 part black to 2 parts moldy wine. So I wanted quite a desaturated and dark base to this, and if you add black to a colour, it desaturates it. Also, if you add white to a colour, it also desaturates it. So it is a little bit confusing, but essentially we desaturate colour by adding black to it. But I wanted it to be a super dark base because I want the highlights to be super tight, and you'll see that kind of as we go. But there are just some, I've not fast forwarded the footage here, so you can see where I'm particularly focusing on. So the end of the wings, the bits that are kind of rounded, and then the front of it as well, and then the top of the gun. So we're going to use moldy wine next, and every time that we use one of these airbrush colours, we almost want to work in a smaller and smaller band of light. So we want to be tighter and tighter, and that might just mean bringing your airbrush closer to the canopy. And it might also mean for your airbrush as well, turning down the pressure a little bit. We just want to have a little bit of control here. So we want to keep within that initial band of light, that really broad highlight that we did initially. But we still want to see some black. Now, if you go a little bit over the top with any of these airbrush highlights and they don't look as tight as my highlights do, that's absolutely okay, because I'm going to show you how to tighten up those highlights a little bit later on, and show you a little bit of a cheat code for tightening them up if you are using an airbrush with a relatively big needle, let's say, or you want them kind of a finer highlight. Anyway, go along here, just work on that moldy wine just within that band of light, and then we're going to use elderflower. So these are all desaturated violets. This is what the army paint call them, and then this is going to be our tippity top highlight with our airbrush. And then I'm just going to try and work in the smallest band of light that I can. And you can really see, working in that small band of light, you can see that it really looks super shiny on the highlights and still very dark within the recesses and the places that are still black. And what it does, maximizing that contrast in that way just makes it look super interesting. But it also just makes it look super dynamic as a model as well. That's why these models look so cool when they're airbrushed, because you've got such a stark contrast between the black and then this top highlight. And actually, if you look at the color in the cup, that's actually it's basically it's a pink, isn't it? And having that extreme contrast always looks really, really sick. So elderflower, really nice color. So we're going to use Grim Black next. So this is a speed paint, and I'm going to thin it with 1 part thinner to 1 part speed paint. And what you can see me doing here is I'm just tightening up the highlights by spraying this into the shadows. Now, because it's so thin, because I've added airbrush thinner into the cup with the Grim Black speed paint, you will basically see when we lay this down, you can still see the underlying color underneath, but it will just be darker. So this is just a good way to tighten up any highlight that we've created, and we feel we've gone a bit too broad with that highlight. So again, it just tightens everything up and just maximizes that contrast to an absolutely unbelievable degree. Now, if you're using a paintbrush, you can absolutely do this with a paintbrush. It will just obviously just take longer, and you might want to mix between the colors as you work up as well. So you would do the highlights with a brush, but you're just going to mix between them to get nice gradual fades as well. And then you could glaze this speed paint mixed with maybe a bit of glaze medium and just glaze that into the shadows if you want. But if you haven't used an airbrush before, this is a kind of a perfect model to start with airbrushing, actually, because I thought it was fairly idiot-proof. Actually, I didn't think there was way easier than a Space Marine tank. So we're going to use that same top highlight that I think it was called Elderflower that we were using, and we're going to do the painful job of edge highlighting. Now, when I started this, I was like, ugh, it's going to take me so long to do it. But actually, I just stuck on a bit of music, and it took 45 minutes to an hour. And by the end of it, I was like, you know what? That wasn't as painful as I thought. And actually, the end results look really, really good. One of the things I would say about edge highlighting in this way is that it is a bit of an effort. You do need to concentrate. You need to have, you need to be able to make corrections, because you will make a mistake. Like, it's just, I made loads of mistakes when I was doing it. So you just want the colours on hand on your wet palette, just in case you slip, or your edge highlight is just a little bit too broad. But essentially, you need to go around all the edges on this model, and actually that has the great effect. You can see that I just made a mistake there, and just wipe it off quickly with my finger. But if I need to go back and make a further correction, then I can with paint on my wet palette. But you need to go around the entire model, and the edge highlighting in this way will just brighten the whole model up. And you can see here how it does that. It just brightens the whole thing up. It really makes the whole model pop. And I would say I don't edge highlight that much, but it's actually quite a good skill to have. And if you want to do some top highlights, some further edge highlights, you can do it with Forbidden Fruit if you feel like you want to further enhance any highlights. That's the next step up from Elderflower that I would go. So let's work on the canopy now. So we're going to use Royal Blue, Artic Gem, and Bright Sapphire. Now, this is pretty simple thing to do. We're just going to use these three colours. We're going to lay a base of Royal Blue down, and then 2/3 of the way up, we would then use our Artic Gem. And then what you can see me doing in this part here is just using the Bright Sapphire just at the very bottom of the canopy. So we've got that sick fade. So we've got the darkest part at the top, the lightest part at the bottom, and then that's it. Literally no more than that. And because we're using three colours, I would just be working in thirds. It is quite literally that simple. And it's a really quick and easy way to do your canopies on any kind of tank. But also, if you wanted to make it red, it's the same principle. You start with a dark red, a medium red, and then a brighter red. You could do it any colour that you wanted, but it's just a nice quick way to be able to. And the benefit of this is if I don't keep it clear, I don't have to paint the guys on the inside. So if you're looking for speed painting, you still want it to look good, but actually looking for a speedy process, this is the way to do it. Right, so here we go. Here is the stencil. Now, this stencil is made by Green Stuff World. I looked online. There were lots of different stencils. I've used Anarchy Models, and I think I've used Anarchy Model stencils, which are a UK kind of like distributor who makes some quite cool stencils, but they didn't kind of have the sizes in stock that I needed, and I wasn't convinced that it would be as sticky as I needed. So I had a look online. I got this Green Stuff World one. It was way stickier and way tackier than I thought it would be, and I will come to that in a little bit. But it went down okay. One thing I would say is that what I didn't take into account was the gems on the front of the carapace. The gems created a bit of a hassle for me, where the Harlequin diamonds wouldn't sit nicely over it. So if I were to do this again, I would probably shave off the gems on the front to get it nice and slick and nice and smooth, and then I wouldn't have any higgledy-piggledy parts where there's a little bit of overspray, because it simply can't bend around it, is what I would say. Yeah, that would be my advice to you guys. I'll talk about it when we peel it off. I'll talk about my further kind of reflections about it in a bit. But the other thing I would say is when you're doing any kind of masking, just mask way further than you think you need to mask, because I can guarantee that as much control and no matter how tight your airbrushing is, I can absolutely guarantee there'll be some overspray if you don't mask way further than you think you need to mask. So it's better to be safe than sorry. You don't want to be trying to remove paint that's been airbrushed on. You can do it when it's been gloss varnished, and you can see how shiny this is. It's been gloss varnished in preparation for this stage because I need to protect the paint job underneath. If you're somebody who doesn't have an airbrush, you're just going to have to basically do this by hand, and it will take a very, very, very long time to do. So I can't help you with that one. I just recommend getting an airbrush and a stencil like the one I'm using here, if you want to do kind of Harlequin style kind of stencils like that. Right, I'm going to talk about where it all went wrong for me. So I started with Angelic Red, and I also had Sacred Scarlet as well. So this is Angelic Red, and it's going down. And what I wanted, similar to the Games Workshop box art, I wanted essentially kind of a dark red to a light orange. When the colours went down, it wasn't quite what I was looking for, and actually I was like, oh, I should have just gone for orange instead. Now I will correct that a little bit later on. The problem is here, the problem I've got in saying to you, oh, just use orange, is that it might not look like the same as I've done, because I've obviously laid down some colours underneath, and then I'm going to use orange over the top completely. So if I was just to say to you, oh, just use orange instead, that's not quite what I did. So I want to show you my mistake, and so you can see what it looks like. So basically, I did those colours, I wasn't happy with it, and then I just did the whole thing in Molten Lava. Okay, so I did the Sacred Scarlet, I did I think it was Resplendent Red, but actually I was just like, no, that's not right, that's not the colours I'm looking for. So I just did everything in Molten Lava. Now, that means I haven't got a nice fade on those diamond patterns, and what you can see me doing here is I'm using a blue in the shadow of just a blue wash, the blue tone from the Warpaint range in the shadows, and I'm doing that because it maximizes contrast. Blue against orange, that's such a classic color combination, and I've just sprayed that into the shadows, and once that's sprayed I've got like a bit of a fade, which is what I wanted, and you can see me peeling it off here. Now, I had quite a lot of overspray on this, partly because of mainly because of the gems, but also I felt that the stencil was so sticky that it also lifted off some of the gloss varnish. Now, it didn't lift off any of the paint work, but it certainly lifted off some of the gloss varnish. So my advice would be, before you put it down in a tank, just put it against your clothes or something, try and take away some of that tackiness. You can see how hard I'm pulling this off to get it off. It is so tight on there. So maybe just put it down on your clothes first of all, and then just get rid of some of the tackiness and then put it on. It would be my advice to you, because it pulled some of the gloss varnish off, but luckily it didn't pull any of the actual paint job off, which was good. But you can see a little bit of overspray, particularly around where the gems are. So I just needed to go back and clean it up with the original colours that I had. It wasn't anything special. It just took probably 10 minutes of time just to make it nice and clean. And I couldn't change it with battle damage. That was the thing. In this scenario, sometimes you just be like, okay, well, I'll just use battle damage to hide it. I couldn't do that because of the nature of this particular weaver, the nature of the model. So just have those colours on hand on your wet palette, and then you can make kind of corrections from there. Once that's all done, I then gloss varnish it again. So it protects everything again. And I had to gloss varnish it again, partly because I had areas where the gloss had been taken off, so it wasn't nice and smooth. But we're also preparing it for our transfers as well. So I use Micro Set and Micro Sol. They're relatively straightforward to get hold of, especially in the UK, but there are other products in terms of decal softeners. I've done a whole video about transfers and how to do transfers in the way that I do them, so I would recommend that. But the short version is, we use Micro Set first, which is the blue one, and it says number 1 on it. We lay that down, we put the transfer on top, we leave that to dry for a little bit, and then we come back and then we roll a cotton wool bud dipped in the Micro Sol over the top of the over the transfer. Now what that does is it just pushes out any air bubbles that we might have and just makes it adhere to any curved surfaces. This was a really straightforward one to do, because actually, although the front is curved, actually it was a nice and smooth place to put transfer. This was way easier than putting transfer, say, on Space Marine shoulder pads, which do take some time, can take, you know, an hour or so to do properly. This was so easy to do and took like half an hour to set nicely, and then I was good to go. So again, this is, you know, if you can get this bit right, if you can get the carapace bit right, I think that you know, and you invest that little bit of time in the edge highlighting, you can get a quick and easy Harlequin like weavers done in yeah, a matter of no time at all. So the varnish, I couldn't find any satin varnish. I was like, should I use satin? So what I did was I used 2 parts matte to 1 part gloss, basically made a satin varnish, and it was exactly the kind of the finish that I wanted. You don't want it, I think, with these kinds of vehicles, you don't want them to be totally matte. I know the temptation, say if you're watching this and you've come from Horus Heresy or you do Space Marines, you like that matte finish, but actually I think that it's quite nice if it's got kind of a bit of sheen to it, and it also maintains the luster of the colours because we're not affecting the chroma of the colour by using a matte varnish. You know, that's something that you'll find with yellows and reds. If you use a really harsh matte varnish on it, sometimes it can affect the chroma, whereas this has still got some sheen and still maintains some of the colours. You can see the kind of like the shine on it as I'm hair drying it, and that's the finish. And actually it looks perfect for kind of like Harlequins, right? This is exactly what kind of you'd expect like a Harlequin vehicle to be, like slightly shiny, but you can still see the colours. Right, on to the metallics now. So we're going to use Greedy Gold, and the Undercarriage, we're just going to do it entirely in gold. Like most golds, basically, through the airbrush, you will need 3 thin coats, and you're going to need to hair dry it in between. I have yet to come across a gold that you can just do in 1 coat that has, you know, has good enough opacity. It just takes a few coats of gold just to build it up to get to that level, especially if you're doing it over a black varnish. Like that's just it. No company can make their golds good enough that it can be done in 1 shot. It basically can't. So purple tone, light tone, I mix this together. This is kind of my favoured mix for golds. Mixed it all together, and then you can just see me laying this wash down over it. Just be careful of pooling, but it's not too much of an issue if it pools, because we're just going to dry brush this in a brighter gold later on. But just be aware that's something, you know, especially the way that this was secured to the cork. I think that you just need to think about where it's going to pool and just wick away if you've used too much, is all I would say. But again, most of this is hidden, you know, so I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but then you'll see me in a bit, just give it a dry brush a little bit later on. But I really felt like, you know, we honestly don't need to spend too much time on this, but I also felt using gold, you know, it'd be quite a decadent thing, and I quite like that combination. We've got the violets within the armor, and then we've got the golds, and they just contrast so nicely. You know, the violets and the golds, you know, they're opposing colors on the color wheel. But yeah, it looked decadent, but also just everything, it makes everything else pop around it as well. On the carapace, I'd really recommend using a brown base coat and then doing the golds over the top. I think that it's nice to have that kind of almost that dark brown black edging around it, just to differentiate between the gold and then the carapace color. So if you're doing something like that, I'd always recommend just doing a dark brown first and then laying the gold over the top as well. And then we are going to be doing some dry brushing and I'm just using a makeup brush here. So you know what dry brushing is. You put it on your brush, you take most of it away, and then give it a dry brush. You can't obviously, with this big element, you can dry brush it and it's nice and simple. But with the smaller elements, the gems that I made gold, and you saw me washing them there, you will need to do it by hand and just give it a rough highlight at the top. It doesn't need more than that with this kind of yellowy gold. It's bright gold, it's called. But it is quite a good natural jump up from the greedy gold that we used as a base. But that is basically the bottom done. Now you could add some like heat blooms and stuff like that to it if you wanted. I didn't decide to do it on this one, but you certainly could. But it's so hidden away, I'm just not convinced that you need to do that. You can see the carapace is all, or the window canopy, sorry, is all glued on. Just use a tiny bit of super glue on this. You just don't want any misting that will look unsightly, and then you glue the bottom on, and voila, it looks something like this. So you can see all the gold bits are hidden away, but the gold does make the purple pop and vice versa, just because they're so contrasting. It looks decadent, but it also looks pretty cool, I think. So over to the guide. Now, I just to keep everything all together, and because I had those colours on my wet palette, I'm basically going to do it exactly the same as I did the airbrushing on the carapace. I'm calling it the carapace of the arm. I don't know if that's the right word, but the kind of the hull of the weaver. And essentially all I'm doing is I'm doing exactly the same with the actual Harlequin gunner, but I'm just doing it with a brush. And I suppose this is a good example. If you're somebody who hasn't got an airbrush, this is the way I would go about doing it, which I would lay down that moldy violet that we used, that whatever our base color was, mixed with black, and then we go over to the next highlight, and then we go up to elderflower. But you can make softer transitions between these because there's quite a step up between them. So I think if you make some mixes in between, that would be good. And then if the mixes are, there's too much of a gradient between them, you can then create glazes to soften the transitions between the two. Saying that though, and I think this is probably the most important bit for me, when people look at your force and look at your army, the last thing that they're really going to look at is the actual gunner. Okay. Now, Games Workshop obviously has to spend lots of time on all parts of the model to make it look good. They're trying to sell a model to you, but actually most people are going to be looking at the hull of the weaver itself. So if you can get that bit right and you spend time on that and doing the edge highlights as we discussed, you can actually do quite a quick job on the gunner, because you're not going to be looking at that. That's not where people's attention is going to be drawn. So and this is my philosophy with army painting. If the bits that people are going to see, the obvious bits, spend some time on that. Things that are going to draw their eye, spend time on that. And these smaller details, you can spend less time. And I think that that's what makes army painting different from, say, display painting. It's about it being practical within the time restraints that you've got, but you still want it to look good. The hair, I just did a mix of brown and orange, the original molten orange that we used, and then I just highlighted it with molten orange, so it just ties everything together really nicely. So the gunner matches the vehicle. If you want to do something slightly different, that's totally up to you. I just had these colors on the wet palette as I needed to make corrections on the weaver as I went. So it just made sense that everything kind of like matched together, just because I had the colors ready to go. And then you'll see in a second, because it's just about to come up, this is the finished version. You saw it right at the start, and this is the finished version. And I was really pleased with how this came out. Like, I was like, whoa, it took me maybe 5 to 6 hours to film, to paint, and I was really pleased with how it came out. I would definitely do another one, and I can definitely see myself doing another one at trying my absolute hardest, like tippity top best job. I would love to give that a go. But I hope you enjoy the video. I hope it's been useful. And as always, if you got this far and you haven't subscribed, what are you doing with your life? Give me a sub and leave me a comment as well. And I hope it was useful for you. I shall see you next month on the next video, where I think I will be doing some Horus Heresy and some Age of Sigmar. Take care, guys. See you soon.